Hi, I'm Ayers, and I'm going to go over the dead simple basics of what a camera is so that you can kind of use them better, because it can be like really annoyingly frustrating for a new person. So I want to kind of give you the basics of how to use them so that you can kind of improve yourself. The basics to a camera are basically like, well, this is a camera. A camera is just a device which records things. It could be video or photos, whatever. All right, so, I mean, you've seen lots of cameras around. You press that button to take the photo. The light goes through this lens. This is called the lens, and it goes into the body of the camera. In the old days, there was something called film, and today there is something called a sensor. Behind this mirror here, which is what you see through, there is a digital sensor, which today the light goes through your lens onto the sensor. Then the sensor does some crazy things and turns it into a file, which you can then take out of your memory card, put it in your computer, and put on the internet. Okay? And look, there's a little screen so you can see what you're doing. In the old days, you didn't have a screen. Now, the basic functions of a camera are three things. All right, so there's something called shutter speed. All right, what's the shutter? That's the shutter. Why is it called a shutter? Because it shuts. Pretty awesome, okay? So now, what's shutter speed? Well, shutter speed is how fast it shuts. So you can slow it down so it goes, that's a slow shutter speed, or you can speed it up real fast so that it goes. That right there was 8,000th of a second, which means that it's opening, before it shuts, it opens, but it's only opening for 1/8,000th of a second, which means. So the reason for that is, say you want to capture something that's moving really fast, you got to choose a high shutter speed for a fast object if you want to snap it. Because what happens with a slow shutter speed, that's 1/6, something like that, 1/6 of a second. It's open for that long. The longer the shutter is open, the more blurriness can get introduced into your shot. So if something's moving, it will blur if you got a long shutter speed. Whereas if you've got a short shutter speed, it's only taking a fraction of the pizza. Whereas if you've got a long shutter speed, you're getting the whole pizza and, you know, just calories and saturated fats, things like that. Don't worry about the joke. All right, so that's the first thing, shutter speed. Now, as you go to a faster shutter speed, it also makes your photo darker, all right? Whereas a long shutter speed, because you're letting in more light for a longer period of time, it makes it brighter. Does that make sense? Now, the second thing is what's called aperture. Aperture. What does aperture mean? The word aperture simply means hole. It just means a hole. What's the hole? The hole is this. On your lens, or sometimes it's built into the camera, on your lens, you have this thing called an aperture, and you can close that aperture or you can open it. Now, the more closed it is, the less light you let in. The more open it is, the more light you let in. Okay, so that's another way to adjust the brightness of your overall image. But the other special thing that happens with aperture is, and this doesn't make any real sense, but this is the way the physics of it work, the more open it is, the less you get in focus. The less you get in focus. The more light you let in, the less gets in focus. So if you want to take a portrait of someone, you want to have what's called a really open aperture if you want to get that lovely blurry background effect, you know. Or if you're taking a big landscape photo, you want to get all the distance in focus, you got to close down your aperture, let in, and it sharpens the image and it gets more in focus. You know what I'm saying? All right, good. Now, is there another point I wanted to make? Oh yeah. Now, aperture, the numbering system for aperture is really strange. Now, because the smaller the number, the wider the aperture. It's totally opposite and it makes no sense, but that's the way it is. So you might hear some cameras, lens might say 2.8 or something. Like on this old lens, this is a really old manual lens, you probably don't see these things, but it has the numbers written on the lens. This one, it goes 1.7, 2.8, f4, 5.6, and as you go, if you go higher in the numbers, the smaller that hole gets. Okay. Now, there's another thing. Like in photography, they call these numbers. They don't just say 2.8. They say f 2.8. What does the f mean? The f means whatever you want it to mean. It could mean fu to the light if you wanted. It's like, you know, okay, so imagine if you're saying fu to the light 5.6 times. That's a lot more than saying it just 1.7 times. Or if you go all the way and say, okay, I'm saying it to them 16 times in a row, that's going to stop a lot of light from getting in there. Okay, there's another crazy Luke joke for you. All right, cool. Now, all right, so far we've gone over shutter speed. That's how long the shutter is open. All right, and then you got aperture. That's how wide the hole is. So there's two things. So the light goes through the hole, and you can choose how wide that is. And then how long the shutter is open for is how long that light hits the actual camera sensor thingy. Okay. Now there's one last thing. It's called ISO. ISO. The word ISO it's the name of a corporation or something. Doesn't really make any sense. Like a lot of these camera terms, like. Don't even get mixed up in the terms, man. It's like, don't worry about it. You're like, oh, it's got some special meaning, and if I don't understand, I can't. No, it doesn't matter, man. You can be blind. I'll take that back. All right. So ISO, you've got your light going through the hole. It's coming through the shutter for a certain amount of time, and then when it hits your sensor, the ISO is how sensitive you've made your sensor. You get that? How sensitive. So on some cameras, there's a button that you can press, and it raises or lowers the sensitivity. And the sensitivity numbers can go from 100, 200, 300, 400, you know, right up to 1600, 3200, and the really wild cameras these days do like 50,000 or more, something crazy. Now, like, that's just another way that you can adjust the brightness of your image. All these three things are just to do with brightness, but then they have their own little special effects. So with ISO, if you pump it up, give it a really high number like 1600 or something, you will make your image brighter, but the downside of that is the higher the ISO goes, the more graininess, it reduces the quality of your photo because it's kind of, you know, it's stepping up the gas on the camera, so it's kind of pushing it beyond its normal limits, and so you get more light in, but it kind of degrades the image the higher you go. So ideally you want to keep it as low as you can, like 100 or 200, while still making sure the image is bright enough to use, you know? Okay, now I've learned about these three things: shutter speed, aperture, ISO. So they all have their little special functions, but overall, all three of them, they just adjust the brightness of your picture. That's all it does. And so a professional photographer just knows how to balance the right aperture with the right shutter speed with the right ISO to get a correctly bright image, which also has, you know, oh, you want a little bit in focus, you want the whole thing in focus. Do you want some blur effect, or do you want it super like sharp and edgy and not moving at all these sorts of things. So that's the basics of a camera and the three main functions that it does. Every single camera you use, whether it's fully automatic or you're in manual or whatever, they still use these three functions. But on a phone, it does it totally automatically and you don't even know about it, but it's doing these things. Whereas on a, and that's why, people buy professional cameras, because you have full control over all these things. Most people don't need it, to be honest. But if you're a pro and you really know what you want in your photo, knowing these three basic controls of a camera will get you places. All right? So, I hope that's made enough sense for you. I'm Luke Ayers, and thanks for watching.